Yeah, so we like to push that even further. Our initial launch was a 196, and we really looked at keeping that cost per customer down. We thought 1x32 was a little bit too safe, and we really liked the idea of getting a high count split and keeping spares proofed into our network.
Hey, fiber-minded people. You just heard Zachary Cronauer speaking from Blue Ridge Communications. Blue Ridge is a Tier 2 cable MSO in northeast Pennsylvania. They have been building HFC networks in the past, have a long history. They were founded in 1950. And 2 weeks ago, they announced their move towards XGS-PON. This is particularly interesting because this basically means they're going to replace the last mile coax infrastructure, which was used previously with DOCSIS, with fiber. And we're going to discuss with Zach what architecture they're using, how they're actually building the network. So a lot of insights into their thinking of a cable MSO. And without further ado, let's head into the interview. You are listening to Become Fiber-Minded, a podcast about fiber optics. Every 2 weeks, we are bringing you insightful conversations with industry experts so you can become fiber-minded as well and get the success you deserve. I'm your host, Christian Till, and you can follow me on fiberminded.com. Welcome to Become Fiber-Minded. Hi Zachary, welcome to this episode of Become Fiber-Minded.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
My pleasure. So for those of you who don't know you, Zachary, could you give us a brief introduction on yourself?
Yes. So my name is Zachary Cronauer. I work for Blue Ridge Communications, which is located in Northeast Pennsylvania. We are a Tier 2 cable MSO. I started my career in communications through the military. I had the great opportunity to serve our country in Iraq for the fiscal year, I think, of 2009 to 2010. That's where I really started to get into fiber. I was able to get certified through the Fiber Optic Association of America as an optical technician. Then I had the great opportunity to come to Blue Ridge as a field engineer. I worked my way into the head ends, so I was a head engineer for a few years. Then I went back to designing fiber optic networks for a few more years after that, and now I am the head of fiber initiatives here at Blue Ridge.
Excellent. This is going to be a very interesting discussion.
Yes, I'm very excited. I think we match up very well. I think we both love fiber tremendously.
Yes, indeed. And Blue Ridge, I think, if I recall correctly, they have over 250,000 customers.
Yes, that's correct.
And I saw that 2 weeks ago on this recording, you announced the move to XGS-PON from HFC.
Yes, so it's a great timing for the podcast.
Yes,
Blue Ridge
indeed.
did make the announcement. We had a test neighborhood launch last year during the COVID pandemic. They went really well. All the numbers were great. All the technology was proofed out, and corporate saw the success we had and decided that we're going to rebuild our entire plant through XGS-PON.
Awesome. Funny enough, I had last week another discussion with a different operator who's also currently HFC, and they are thinking about moving to XGS-PON. So I'm going to ask you a few questions on this.
Yes, absolutely. I hope they do.
Fingers crossed. One of the things they are concerned about is the placement of the OLTs. If I understand correctly, you are using remote OLTs, or how do you build the network, or what is the plan to build the network?
Yes. So in our initial test launch, we used Calix remote OLTs, which really helped us because we're very rural. So like you said, the most important part is that placement of the OLT and how to get that 20 kilometers as close to the customer as possible and as efficiently as possible. So Calix had a great solution. And as we move forward, we're going to utilize Calix in a cabinet style and a remote OLT style. And the cabinet is through Clearfield, and our access technology has been through Clearfield. But I don't want to jump ahead if that's where future questions are.
No, absolutely. They will definitely come to that. And these remote OLTs are connected through DWDM, I assume?
Yes, we have 16-channel DWDMs will activate 2 remote OLTs.
With a 10 gig or 100 gig link?
10 gig.
Okay. And going forward to the passive components, do you target a 1x32 split ratio or 1x64?
Yeah, so we like to push that even further. Our initial launch was a 196.
Holy cow!
Yes. So XGS, as you know, can go up to 128 And we really looked at keeping that cost per customer down, right? So we wanted to make sure that we were spending an efficient amount of money and also keeping the cost down on the customer. We thought, a 1x32 was a little bit too safe. We used high-powered optics, and then we did a pre-connectorized solution from our OLTs out. And we really liked the idea of getting a high count split and keeping spares proofed into our network as houses split or neighborhoods are developed. But we figured any large neighborhood would just get a new ROLT, so we weren't too concerned with only staying on a 1x32. So as we went up to a 1x96, we saw our cost per customer drop significantly.
Mm-hmm. And this is a single split or dual split?
In what way do you mean by a single or dual?
So usually what is happening is, in order to preserve some fibers, you put one splitter inside the cabinet and then one additional splitter. For example, if it's a multi-dwelling house, multi-dwelling unit, put a 1x32 splitter, for example, for a high dwelling unit in there. So there's a question always on how many splits do you actually do in order to reach this 1x96 splitter ratio?
Yes, so we use 3. Each port is fed by then a 1x2 PLC splitter, and we do 2 1x8 splits off that 1x2. That gives us 12 fibers that we cascade through our Clearfield URX terminals. So we do a fiber indexing solution, and as we hit each tap, that hits another 1x8 splitter. And then we cascade 12 inline. So 8 times 12 is 96.
Huh. And where are these splitters located? So do you already have one splitter next to the remote OLT?
Absolutely, great question. So the first 2 splitters, the 1x2 and the 1x8, are the only splicing in our plant for our XGS-PON. We have a 600 enclosure next to every ROLT, and they're built the same. That's where the DWDM is. That's where our tail feeding the ROLT, and that's where our port cascades start. So that really, what I really wanted to do was show that we could deploy a very, very fast and efficient, and I thought the best way to do this was through a pre-connectorized solution. People always go back and forth between splicing and pre-connectorized. And I think a lot of that has to do with the amount of training your technicians have, the skill of your technicians, because splicing is a skill. It's not just something anybody can do, building an enclosure, because as you add drops to all these things, fiber can get very, very bird's nest or rat's nest. And I don't like to see that. I like to see very clean and organized enclosures. So I left a lot of our important backbone splicing to our most experienced techs. And I made a pre-connectorized solution for our top-to-house guys or people that were building it. And what I saw was that in a pre-connectorized solution, in a preset cables, we chose about 10 different sizes. And that way our outage time dropped, right? So if we only had 500 feet between 2 taps, and it got hit, a pole got hit, or we're very rural, a bullet could hit through, somebody hunting can miss and shoot our fiber. And what we really thought was a great idea was the fact that we could just change that fiber out. Real quick, we saw an average, outage time then dropping from maybe 3 hours of prepping an enclosure and splicing a 12 fiber down to about a half an hour where we could plug and play on each side.
Ooh. So now it's actually the customer availability to install the fiber is the limiting factor for you, and no longer the building the network.
Yeah, well, it's twofold, right? Building the network, so we have our contractors or our in-house guys being able to build our network fast and more efficiently because it's predetermined our sizes and length off the design. And secondly, it's keeping customers in service, right? Having a great customer experience is very important, and we like to make sure that downtimes are mitigated. And the last thing I would want to see in our access technology is high counts of fiber feeding customers, just because I think it takes time to repair, no matter what it is. Building an enclosure, stripping back fiber, splicing fiber. It's all great, and it's an important skill, but we can do that in our backbone, right? We can limit a lot of our access technology, our customer facing technology, as plug and play, and then any sort of outage or any sort of pole getting hit, underground getting dug up, anything like that can be temped out and then fixed permanently and a lot faster.
Interesting, very interesting. Now coming back to the 1x96 splitter ratio, you are offering currently 1 gigabit of speed, and this obviously includes a lot of overbooking if you completely use all the splitter ports.
Yes, but we haven't seen that capacity even hit yet. So we have been monitoring our network, and we've been feeding each ROLT with enough bandwidth to show that even with all IP streaming and all 96 customers hooked up, we haven't really hit a threshold yet where we feel uncomfortable with that. If we ever did, or if the technology scaled where we need to limit our customers and split, say a node split, but in PON, we remove that 1x2 splitter, right? Add another RLT, feed the same amount of customers off that same enclosure. And that's why we wanted to make sure that enclosure was right next to that RLT.
Yeah, interesting, very interesting. I had some of the same thoughts. Personally, I'm not a big fan of having a splitter right next to the OLT due to the troubleshooting.
Yep.
Because one of the main problems from what I see is always if something is problematic, is either the OLT port or potentially the in-house cabling, drop cabling.
Yes. Yeah, so I agree with you. What I like about XGS-PON and the way that we designed ours in our network architecture is really the outage will depict where you start troubleshooting. I've been teaching our techs and our supervisors to look at the amount of customers down, whether it's 8, so it's a tap to house issue, who's online with those same splitters, and our fiber network management's getting a lot better as we're able to rebuild a lot of this. And then we can even scale that. So if it's 16 or 24, then you can start to peg where your outage most likely is. Or if it's a whole port, you start at your enclosure. Is it the ROLT? Is it the port down? Is it the transceiver? Is it inside the enclosure? So really it's about identifying what type of outage you're seeing, and that's really giving you your starting point.
Excellent. And you mentioned that you're using Clearfield currently for the supply of the active cabinet, and I assume also for the drop fibers and the passive components as well?
Not the passive splitters right now. We use their terminals and their drop cables and what we call our feeder cables. This is the 12 flat fiber in between each tap. So they custom designed a part for us that takes the blue fiber of every 12, hits a 1x8 splitter, and then the next 11 will shift up one. So between every terminal, the blue fiber has a light on that goes right to the splitter. So it was originally a CommScope fiber indexing, and Clearfield just piggybacked off that. And we really liked the customization. Their terminal has 16 ports in it. So we're able to really customize our part numbers, and they've worked well with us in doing that. And that customization gives us a huge advantage to deal with the real world, right? Designing is fantastic and that's lots of fun. And then you get out into the real world, it's completely different. That pole's 20 feet this way or across the street, or we can't place it there. So having that customization portion in our pre-connectorized solution gives us the ability to mitigate a lot of those errors or inefficiencies in different types of design. So I always tell our design, because I am kind of the bridge between our design and our techs. What is the computer world versus the real world? They're always two very different things. So we should always be trying to find solutions that fit our topology instead of what fits best on a computer. And I think that's something we're excelling at here.
So how often do you take your planning guys out in the field and say, this is what you planned?
Yes. So we try to do that fairly regularly. We see a big issue come up. We try to get our design engineering team here is fantastic, and I couldn't speak more highly of them, and our leadership team here as well for being willing to push the boundaries a little bit and try to be innovative in our solutions. But so yes, the design engineering team, much to their chagrin, right? They always like to stay behind the computer. They do come out into the field and kind of see what I'm talking about. And I try to make it a priority. We've talked many times about how the techs are troubleshooting, what they're looking at, tray capacity when you're designing enclosures to always make sure you're not putting too many CWDMs in the same tray or placing the CWDM at the top and then the bottom. And you got fibers crisscrossed in the enclosure like crazy. So, kudos to them for being willing to listen and learn, and kudos to the techs for dealing with some crazy designs sometimes. So.
Now, with the move to XGS-PON, and you have been an MSO operator for the past years and decades, basically, how do you make sure that the complete technology shift is working seamlessly for the customers as well?
Yeah, so that's a great question. when we went to launch XGS, we had trial customers or test customers. So we went through, and actually I should probably back that up. We put it in our own lab significantly. I put everything into the lab. We mock it up on Excel or in our design, our network. We messed around with the power budget, making sure that all of our thresholds made sense, all of our monitoring, all of our reporting. We get it active in the test lab and we push it to the limits. We made sure, hey, if our threshold's minus 26, what happens at minus 27? What happens at minus 28? What happens at minus 32? What are we seeing? Is it pre and post errors? When does it walk off the cliff? What are the issues? Then we build it, right? So we have to build it. You got to trust all of your pre-work. We built it, and then we had some very friendly customers. We had I think we had 1 or 2 employees that lived in the area. Then we had some trial customers that we activated their service. They had X amount of months free as we just tinkered and toyed with it. What happens if what happens if this happens? Can you call? Can you make sporadic calls? Can you change your channels? Can you activate TiVo? So it's all, we're very fortunate that we had a lot of great customers that were willing to help us along this way. And just working together as a team, and it's collaborative, right? So we have our NOC, we have our engineering team, we have our techs, we have level 2, the CSRs that are dealing with the reporting, just all on the same page. And I think it's a credit to our CTO for giving us the leadership to be able to do it.
You mentioned the reporting. Me as a test and measurement geek is always the question, what kind of measurements do you do and how do you consolidate the reporting, especially since you're working with subcontractors?
Yes. So that was tough, because it's so new, right? It's such an advanced technology. I said we kind of went from kind of walking or crawling into sprinting at full speed backwards, there was a lot of trial and error. I went up and I showed our contractors and our field office, our local field office, what we were doing, what our plan was, how we were going to do this. Then we had Clearfield come out. Actually, they couldn't physically come out because it was during the COVID pandemic. So we Zoomed like crazy, and kudos to them because they Zoom trained almost every tech. They were all very comfortable with everything. And then we launched it, and we tried to make sure that each terminal was tested and proofed as they activated it. So with PON, if you're looking at it that way, and it's more of a fiber network install, because once that tap is terminated and then proofed with light, right, and you're within your levels, you could serve customers that day. The trick was to not go back and kind of redo work because you don't want to mess with dirty connectors. So we invested in MPO inspections, we did cleaning kits, we did power meters. I threw everything I could at it. I made sure we were loaded for bear, and we just saw what worked best. What did we do? What was successful? What was unsuccessful? And kind of built our own internal, checks and balances. And really, it was a credit to our local office because they were on top. We did QCs after the contractors went through. We proofed their numbers. So what we did was we would create an Excel sheet, and each cascade would have between 8 and 15 terminals because of different branching and everything like that. So we made sure we had the tap name, the pole number, and then the light level that they were proofing. And once we got that report back, we'd send a QC, check the first one, check the middle, check the end, and see, are those numbers accurate? Once that's accurate, then it went to install, and our CSRs could then schedule people could call in, those addresses were serviceable. So testing and measurement was very, very key. An XGS inline PON meter, very, very powerful. What I did find was even a 6 wavelength power meter that you use for your drops, people can get very dangerous with those now because the wavelength deviation isn't too bad on the downstream. What we found the hardest was actually our upstream wavelength deviation was more apparent than we anticipated. So that was something that we did find more interesting, was that 1270, I believe is the wavelength coming back, was deviating from that 1570 down, or 1590. So that was something that I found very interesting.
If you do not mind telling us on the kind of failure rate, turn up customer, first time hookup, what kind of percentages do you see?
So I didn't see a lot. We had a few fiber drops go bad out. Like I said, we were pre-connectorized. all the way through. We had a great RMA process with Clearfield. Any issues that came up, we would just set that aside, proof it on the table. If it was bad, we send it back, and they send us a new one. So that was really fantastic. But it was so low, I constantly followed up with the text to try to see, hey, are these failing regularly? What success rate are we seeing? And it was pretty high. I want to say between the first 600 or 700 customers that we had on, I want to say 10 or 15 drops, maybe 20. So that success rate is pretty astronomical. The equipment side, I think, was the hard part, as we went through and learned the wireless side and dealing with TiVo and eStreams and all these streaming devices with nothing wired. You kind of look to troubleshoot and you're just unplugging the power, right? And it's like, this is interesting. So I think that side was a little tough, but the fiber side, what's so great about it is what I always find is that it works or it doesn't, right? And once the light's there, as long as your light's good and you can do the install fairly successfully, and we were, knock on wood, fairly successful.
Thanks for this answer and these insights. And you mentioned that you use PON power meter, so upstream, downstream. Is there any particular reason for also considering the upstream? The reason I'm asking is in Europe, for example, we see a trend to downstream only.
Yes.
Power meter measurements, and the upstream is basically disregarded, because if the upstream is failing, just replace the ONT.
Right. I like the inline because it proves whether the ONT is firing back or not. I like to make sure I have our guys make sure, hey, what we talked about earlier, right, is how advanced are your fiber technology? I don't want to see them going through 57 different ONTs at the house just because something is a dirty connector, or they can one-click the ONT, fiber housing. So I think it's just good to make sure in our reporting as well, if that ONT fired back at a +5 the first day and we mark that on the NID at the outside, and the next guy comes and they're seeing a 3 or a 2, your ONT is probably the issue. I think it can help in further troubleshooting down the way. The more information you have, the better you're going to be later. Yes, the downstream is extremely easy to troubleshoot, and once it's there, the ONT 95% of the time will fire back correctly. But I like to, and Blue Ridge likes to make sure 5 years down the road, we're still operating with the most, if we can get all the information now, 5 years later, we don't need to chase it down, or be like, man, I really wish we would have chased that upstream a little bit, and it wouldn't have taken a tech, an hour and a half at a house. Those truck rolls are what's expensive, and we want to limit those as much as possible.
Single truck roll, guys.
Yes,
truck roll.
That's right.
And the other thing is, have you thought about removing the truck roll completely? So going into the field of self-install, just shipping the ONT and say, there you go, Mr. Customer.
Yes. So we have talked about that. We aren't there yet. Not to say we wouldn't get there in the future, but we really liked the idea of making sure that initial truck roll, to get the customer activated, they were seeing friendly faces, they were seeing great Blue Ridge employees doing the installs as much as possible, and just starting that customer experience off very positively. Mm-hmm. But during the pandemic, a lot of those questions were brought up, right? Can a tech be out in the driveway handing them, the parts and pieces needed? Here's a box. Here's everything you need to do. I'll be right outside. We have a portal. We can webcam, and show each other. So we did do that on our HFC side. We just haven't scaled that to fiber yet. So yes, I think going forward and, in the future, I think we will see that more and more, because I think there's a lot of people now that are very technology friendly and that can handle a lot of this stuff, especially in PON. It's so simple. Once that drop is there and you're plugging in and away you're going, and you can go room to room and plug in your TV box, and there's no other coax or wire, needed. That's a very simple install. And I think, a lot of people could do that. So I think moving forward, you're going to see a lot of that.
And on the drop side, one of the things we see in Europe, and I just want to get your feedback, is that it's very hard to, if it's a multi-dwelling house, to find the owner and discuss with him the install and getting the rights. And sometimes, due to the past, they actually own the coax place and they also want to own the fiber place. So who's responsible, etc. How do you deal with that?
Yes, so I think we're going to see that a lot. I think that's going to come up more and more. And I think we're going to see a lot of the same issues you guys have dealt with. I always say Europe has been far surpassing America in fiber, and you guys have done it way before we have. And I think it's trying to make sure that everybody has a great relationship. It's that initial contact with the customer or MDU owner, explaining what we're doing, explaining the technology behind it. Every home is pre-wired in coax, and we're trying to say, hey, we want to eliminate that and put in a fiber drop or multiple fiber drops or a micro duct wherever possible. And it's going to be a lot of balancing, giving up some to get some, and making sure that the customer is at the forefront of our mind, and trying to make sure that we get the ability to place that fiber there. And to answer your question, I don't have an answer yet. I'll let you know in the future, but I'm not looking forward to all those conversations. I think sometimes they're not as successful as one would like. Sometimes not everybody sees that vision, but hopefully soon.
Keep us posted if you find the holy grail. And
yeah, I was going to say, if you have any suggestions or anything, you can just let me know.
Okay, fair enough. And if the audience, anyone has a good suggestion, please reach out. We are more than happy to listen to you.
Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned that you're also responsible for training people. And could you give us some insights on how you structure it and what is included?
Yes, absolutely. So whenever we start training, I like to do the crawl, walk, run method. Okay. You got to be able to crawl before you can walk, and then you got to be able to walk before you can run. And we talked about it before. Training and actually being a viable fiber technician, handling backbone in cases of high count fibers and active circuits and CWDMs and all of that. So what I did was I took it all the way back, and I methodology around crawl, walk, run. So I took basic cable prep as our first step. How many technicians could we get to just do basic cable prep? Doing a ring cut, peeling back the cable and getting it into an enclosure. Then we did building an enclosure. Then we did splicing fiber, and talking about the prep work, because prep is the key, right? And, I don't want to say anybody can splice two fibers, but the fusion splicers, we're a FujiCore shop, so splicing the fiber is fantastically easy. Strip, clean, cleave, and away you go. The machine does everything. It's all of the steps before you get there that are going to determine whether you're successful or not. And just walking through the labeling, the time, the routing, making sure you're as successful so that it's not just the first person in the enclosure, it's the next person afterwards. So we did all of that pre-COVID, and actually, we were just given approval. I can turn it back on next month and go out. So I went to every local office we have. We're a little regionally diverse, and I wanted them to make sure they saw me. I didn't want it to be pamphlets or PowerPoints on me talking over a computer. I wanted to be there in person, answering their questions, walking them through, having them fail, putting them in positions to fail, because you're going to see it, and you're going to have to feel stress, and you're going to have to fail a lot before you understand how to be successful. And doing that in a training environment, it's much better than in an active environment or an outage situation, because people are like, well, send as many people to an outage as possible and they'll just learn something. But nobody's learning anything, because it's just chaotic and people are yelling and we're trying to get services back on and people are elbowing each other out of the way and they're like, just move over, we'll deal with this later. So it's really just making sure that you're going through and you're evaluating. And sometimes not every person is a fiber tech. Sometimes there are people there to just assist the people that are doing the fiber. And that's almost just as helpful as identifying who can, lead the crew and lead the splicing efforts. And obviously next step is troubleshooting, right? The nuts and bolts of fiber and understanding, power budgets, optical link losses, OTDRs, OTDR traces, walking through different pulse widths, the wavelengths you're utilizing, standard industry losses over distance and connectors, and just trying to give them as much information as humanly possible.
And for those interested on the splicing, so we did a few weeks back a nice episode on how to do the perfect splice. And the number thing he actually said is cleanliness.
Absolutely. So anything in fiber, though, it's clean, and then clean it once more. So, and that brought up a great point, not to throw us off on a tangent, but we actually noticed that the one-click cleaners, right? Everybody uses them. It's fantastic. We were actually over cleaning, creating a static on our connector. And as we went to put in, was making the connector dirty again. So, and then you'd take it out and then you'd actually physically do one click. and then it would clean the connector again, and we were able to regain the light that was taken back by our own installation methods. So as a warning to the audience, when it says one click, just do it one time.
Inspect and only clean if necessary.
Yes, there you go. And don't think because one clean makes it really good, 15 cleans makes it fantastic. You're just adding more dirt to the fiber.
Yeah, and then Brian from Senko from episode 9 is probably dancing currently because this is exactly what he said. Like, you can add an anti-static charge and it will actually worsen the connector. Absolutely. I like it that everyone is on the same page and everyone's hammering home the same points to make sure that everyone can succeed in fiber optics. Much appreciated, Zachary, on this one.
Absolutely. And to your point, the fiber industry, is fantastic collaborative wise, and there's so much information out there. And what is great is everybody kind of sees how to be successful, and there's so many different options, but really it's just a fantastic industry, and everybody's just awesome.
Yeah, one last question I have for you,
Sure.
Zachary. One last question before we close this, and will you say us where we can find more about you is, how do you see the future of PON? I mean, yes, we are at XGS-PON now, but come on, 25 gig is around the corner. We see that different trials on 25 gig PON are happening this year. I mean, Nokia alone is doing 15 plus PON trials, 50 gig PON. 4 or 5 years, we have seen announcement from Cable Labs, 100 gig coherent PON. So where are you going with that?
That's a great question. You're starting to see that people are realizing once the fiber infrastructure is there, we're just waiting for the access technology to catch up. I don't think that there is a limit. You talked about 5 years being 50 gig. Fair. I think that's fair. I think you're going to see it. I think people will use it. I think maybe sometimes people won't need to use it, but can. I think it's fancy and I like it. I wish I had it.
Yeah.
And I don't think there is a limit. And if there has been a limit, I haven't seen it. You're seeing 800 gigs pushed across the ocean. You're seeing extraordinary amounts of bandwidth that's only helping people. Everywhere you go, fiber is only an economic boom that helps get people there, right? Anytime there's fiber access, in your area, I think it gives your local businesses more access to reaching people. And I think it helps people. We're seeing through the pandemic how much important broadband was and is to people. And I think it's only going to get better and more efficient and more effective, and even cost savings alone. For the provider, I think you're going to see that PON is the solution. And I think some people are pushing against it, and that's okay. I think that they're not there yet, and I think that's all right. But at least you're seeing many people push forward, and that's really what I think is important, because ultimately we're serving customers and we're serving businesses and helping them grow and helping customers learn and students get to their school if they're closed down. I think fiber is the key to that. And the future, I think, is XGS-PON, and I think it's NG-PON 2 or 25 gig E, and then I think it's 50, and you never know. We'll see 100. I don't know. Maybe we'll see a terabyte in 25 years. I don't know what we could be doing, but the fiber is the key to all of that. And I think it's a great industry that we're in, and I think it's a fantastic time because this boom is unbelievable, and the opportunities are there. And I think what's great is people are taking them, and it's great.
Excellent answer. Do you mind now if I circle back to you in a half year or year's time just to see on your experience with the XGS-PON move from HFC? Because I think this is an interesting topic because we see a lot of MSO thinking about it. So
absolutely. Yeah, 6 months, a year, we can do a review. Maybe I'll be all gray. Maybe I won't have any hair. I think we're light speed ahead, and we're traveling at the speed of light. Is that a fiber pun we can use?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I like it.
And I can give you guys an update on how we're doing, lessons learned, trials and errors, where I failed, where I succeeded, and I think it would be great. I would relish the opportunity.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So, last question: where can people find more about you and Blue Ridge?
Yeah, so I'm very active on LinkedIn. I think it's a lot of fun. Like I said, my name is Zachary Cronauer. You can find me on there. I'd love to connect with everybody and network and learn. And it's just a fantastic area to spread ideas and see people's hard work and just celebrate one another. And Blue Ridge, if you're in northeastern PA, you'll find us.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time, Zachary. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
What an interesting interview we just did with Zachary. I mentioned earlier in the interview that I had a similar discussion with a different operator last week, where they are thinking about moving from their Hybrid Fiber Coax network towards XGS-PON. The main reason for this is that the coax, which is inside the houses and in the last mile, very outdated. They're still using 862 megahertz equipment, and this comes with certain bandwidth limitations. And currently all the MSO operators are being faced as a crossroad. Do they move forward with DOCSIS 3.1 and soon DOCSIS 4, or are they actually going with PON and going full fiber to the home? And certainly now it's a little bit of pressure between operators, where suddenly the cable MSOs, who in the past could always provide the fastest bandwidth, are now being overtaken by fiber providers. And now this little race is starting, and this is what we are seeing also with Blue Ridge, for example, is they now go full throttle XGS-PON. Kudos to them, absolutely full support of that. And I'm very excited for the future when more operators will go fiber to the home. And you might have noticed that I was a bit surprised by the 1:96 splitting ratio. Typically we see 1:32, 1:64 as a maximum, but 1:96 is something you do not see that often. I'm curious to see how this is playing out once they roll out XGS-PON to more customers. And hence I'm looking forward to the next interview in 6 to 12 months with Zachary to see where they stand, if they move back to 1:64. And with that, thanks for listening to this episode of Become Fiberminded. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you subscribe to the podcast in your podcast directory. You can also join my newsletter on fiberminded.com/news to get an update when new episodes are airing. Most importantly, if you learned something new, tell a friend or a colleague about the podcast so we can help more people. Be sure to go to fiberminded.com/episode 10. Once again, fiberminded.com/episode 10 to see the show notes with the links mentioned in this episode. Until next time, keep connecting the world with fiber.